So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our introduction to cryptocurrency and blockchain for use in international trade. I am Karen Wyman from the National Association of District Export Councils, or NADEC. And we'll give you, we're going to go over a few things first while we have people continue to join us. First, what I'd like to do is introduce our speakers. We have Professor Del Wright. He is currently serving as full-time professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and is focusing on law and regulation of crypto assets, primarily as it pertains to security regulations, taxes, and exchanges. He also has his first book out, A Short Happy Guide to Bitcoin, Blockchain, and Crypto, and his follow-on, about to hit shelves, Bitcoin, Blockchain, and Crypto Law in a Nutshell. He, as I mentioned, is a law professor at the University of Missouri. He also has background from the Department of Justice as a trial attorney in the tax division and in the structured capital markets group of Bank of America. His education is equally as impressive, with a bachelor in University of Maryland, his JD at University of Chicago, and his master in public policy at Harvard Kennedy School. And he will be doing this presentation in just a minute. We will also be having W.E. DaCruz guiding the discussion afterwards. She's known as the digital diplomat. And if any of you attended the NADEC's annual conference just a few weeks ago, I'm sure you saw her guiding a couple of the different topics that were very well attended there, the panels. And she believes that e-commerce and exports help to drive economic development. She was awarded the 2021 Minority E-commerce Firm of the Year by the Department of Commerce, and is the co-founder of the Virtual Global Consulting Group, a global digital consultancy that designs and develops e-commerce systems and mobile applications to help generate revenue online for entrepreneurs, companies, and organizations. So with that intro, I'm going to hand it over to Tom Dustman from the NADEC, and he will give you a brief bit on that. Tom.
Thank you, Karen, and good afternoon, good morning to all of the participants. We're very happy to see over 50 participants on this webinar, which is really gratifying. We expect Professor Wright's presentation and input from WE to be not only valuable for your day-to-day business, but also perhaps a view into the future. And I know in my role as International Sales Director for Sun & Products Company in St. Louis, I'm keenly interested to know how Sun should behave when we get our first order with a customer who asks us to accept cryptocurrency as the currency of choice. I'm also the Midwest representative to the National Association of District Export Councils, and it's a privilege of mine to be co-chair of the Education and Outreach Committee. And we feel that the mission of the National Association of District Export Council is to provide guidance to all of those interested in international trade and also as exporters. And we feel that this webinar is appropriate at this time. And we also have webinars, usually one per month, and we'll have an upcoming schedule later on in this presentation. But I wanted again to say thank you to Professor Wright and to WE for their parts in this presentation, and Karen for you acting as the moderator in chief. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Karen.
Thank you, appreciate that, Tom. So just want to give everybody some guidance here. Del is going to go through his presentation, and then we're going to have some question and answer afterwards. Please use the question and answer boxes instead of the chat box. And WE will take over and guide that conversation after Del is finished with his presentation. Heidi, were there any other things that we wanted to show them on that?
No.
Okay, Del.
No, that's it.
Okay, Del, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I will get started on my presentation. And I'll just ask everyone, to the extent you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box when they come up, because I'm probably going to throw a lot of information at you. And I don't want to get too far along. And if enough people are saying, hey, wait a minute, I have a question about this, you know, I sometimes prefer to answer that question up front and say, all right, hey, let me just deal with this, because I see a number of people have this issue. So please ask questions and put them in the box. And again, happy to do this. And, you know, fortunately, I'll say last week I was actually in Cape Town and giving a very similar presentation to a university there and some government workers there about, again, using blockchain and supply chain. So this is a very good follow-up with respect to this issue. So without further ado, I will start to share my deck. And at this point, hopefully you are looking at a slide that says cryptocurrency and blockchain for use in international trade. And if not, someone please yell out really loudly, hey, wrong deck.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, hearing nothing, let's proceed. So I always start with this because understanding how blockchains work and what they are is an important first step to figure out whether or not this thing has any use in your business. And so you get to the core of what a blockchain is. And all a blockchain really is a record-keeping system. It is a way to keep a permanent, tamper-proof record that pretty much anyone can see, but no one can change except the parties who have the right to change that data. And that is the core of what a blockchain is. It's effectively a sequential database of information. And the easiest way to think about it is, let's say you started on, December 1st, 2022, and you had 10 Bitcoins. And Bitcoin is just one example of a blockchain. But let's say it's recorded on a Bitcoin blockchain on December 1st that you had 10 Bitcoins. Right? That means any transaction after that, you can't spend more than 10 Bitcoins, because every transaction in a blockchain has to be consistent with the previous block. And it's called a blockchain because each block contains data, and that data has to be consistent with the block before it. And all those blocks are shared with thousands of computers across the globe, which means that it's impossible for anyone to go in and change old data. So, if I had, let's say, the 10 Bitcoins on December 1st, I couldn't go back to November 30th and say, well, I want to say I have 11, because as soon as I try to do that, the other 10,000 or 20,000 computers in the system would say, wait a minute, that's inconsistent with our shared record of the history of this blockchain. Someone is clearly doing something wrong, and they would kick that transaction out. And that's how blockchains maintain this permanent tamper-proof record. And so, I'm moving toward the issue I think most of you care about is, well, how does that work in the supply chain? And exports are really just part of a supply chain. And where that's going to create value is it's going to allow you to do all the tracking of information in a far more seamless, coordinated manner and way more efficiently without as many eyes and intermediaries basically taking their little fee for helping the transaction along. It allows two parties who want to interact directly without needing someone else to say, oh, we'll facilitate this transaction for you and we'll be the trusted intermediary between party A and party B. With a blockchain, party A and party B can interact directly. And an example I always like to use is, and this is because I drink so much coffee, when I go into Starbucks and I order, drink of choice is a hazelnut latte. If I order that hazelnut latte and I swipe a card, then it's a fairly efficient transaction, meaning, I spend $4 and change. Starbucks will effectively receive that $4 and change at some point in the future, and they give me the coffee immediately. But it's not really that efficient because what I want and what Starbucks wants is I want the coffee, they want the money. They don't want an electronic data signature from Visa saying, oh, we'll give you the money at some point in the future. Why is Visa involved in this transaction? And in a cash transaction, Visa's not involved at all. It's, I give them the money, they give me the coffee. And what blockchains allow is that same kind of immediate exchange without the need for a Visa. And you can do everything digitally. And so when we talk about a blockchain and how these things work, you get to some, what are the rules? How does this thing actually do it? And if you think about those rules, these blockchains allow information and records to be viewed across a broad network, but not to be copied, i.e. if I have 10 Bitcoins, and let's assume I have 10 Bitcoins, and quite frankly, I wish I did. If I had 10 Bitcoins, someone can't say, oh, I see you have 10 Bitcoins. I'm going to cut and paste your Bitcoins and put them in my account. The system doesn't work that way because it uses some cryptography to ensure that only the party who owns the Bitcoins can do anything with them. And how it does that is through the use of what is called private key cryptography, which is a very complicated way of saying only the person with ownership of a certain crypto asset can actually use that crypto asset in transactions. Second big thing it does is protects the network, because a network like this is an important network and it has to be protected, because if it can be attacked and hacked, then someone has some advantage over this network. And it uses cryptography to do this. And there's a lot of computer science and very high level math in how it does that. And different blockchains do it differently. But as a general principle, they use those cryptographic principles. And, I know WE is typing an answer, but effectively, all blocks are time-stamped, which means that if you know when you did a transaction, you'll be able to go and look at that transaction by the time. If nothing else, you can say, well, I bought the coffee at 8 a.m. You'll be able to check the 8 a.m. block to see if the transaction occurred and see exactly where you moved asset one to someone else. And in the Bitcoin network, every block is about 10 minutes, but other blockchains have different block times. And the reason for that is, well, if you're doing something like exchanging crypto for coffee, 10 minutes is not exactly ideal. If you're giving away the coffee, you want to know that you got paid before you actually let the person walk out the door. Now, if you're buying a car, 10 minutes is not really going to be an issue for confirming that the transaction took place, because buying a car is a fairly long process. But different blockchains have developed to allow different kinds of transactions. I will get to Jason's questions in a second. So let me get through this. Okay, and they allow for blocks to be added according to what is called a consensus mechanism. And that is how everyone agrees that the data that is going into the next block is good data, i.e., no one is trying to spend 11 Bitcoins when they only have 10. All those transactions will be kicked out. And that consensus mechanism uses a game theoretical type system to incentivize parties to make sure that the system works. And it does that in a number of ways. There are two big consensus mechanisms. One is called proof of work, which is what Bitcoin uses. And the other one's called proof of stake, which is something that the Ethereum network, which is the second largest blockchain, is expected to move to in sometime later this year, which gets to, I think, Jason's question of what about the energy consumption? And for the proof of work networks, they burn a lot of energy because you have to solve an extremely complicated computer science problem and a math problem to be able to add the next block. And computers across the globe are competing to solve this problem, because if you solve the problem, and the problem takes about 10 minutes to solve, you can say, I solved the problem, and then you post your solution across the network. The problem is very difficult to solve, but very easy to prove. And so if you solve the problem and you're the first one to solve it, you send it out to the network, and the network confirms that the problem has been solved, and therefore you get to add the next block. And right now you get paid in a number of Bitcoin. I think right now the number is three and a quarter, I believe. 3.25 Bitcoins to add the next block. And that is what incentivizes people to do it. But that process burns a lot of energy. Now, there are two arguments about that. One is, this is a waste. Why are we spending all this energy to do it? The other argument is, one, Bitcoin has done more for renewables than any other technology in history, because now people are more incentivized to actually build and develop alternative sources of energy. And the second is, well, energy consumption is about the value it creates. And one argument, and I think this argument has a lot of merit, is, well, we could all save as much energy that we use in Bitcoin if we moved our air conditioners down to about, or up to about 79 degrees in the summer. And you can say, well, 79 is just a little too warm for me. I prefer 72. I'm like, yeah, okay, fair enough. But it's a matter of convenience and value to you. And for the vast majority of the world, that value is, I'd rather burn this energy using Bitcoin than be in an apartment at 79 degrees in the summer. And so energy consumption is a very tricky issue. But Bitcoin likes this system because it promotes a certain amount of trust in the system. Now, Ethereum is moving to a different system, what's called proof of stake, where in proof of stake, you just put up a lot of Ethereum. And because you've put up so much Ethereum or staked it, there's a need to, there's an economic incentive not to do anything that will allow the system to take that Ethereum away. And it's also a random choice. So, if let's say 20,000 people have all staked Ethereum, that means any of those 20,000 people could be chosen to add the next block. And if they did anything bad, as soon as they broadcast it to the network will see, no, you didn't do anything bad. you didn't do anything, you didn't do what you were supposed to do correctly, we're going to take your Ethereum. And because you never know, or the person who's adding that block never knows when they're going to be chosen, it creates kind of a game theoretical way to make sure that the system is somewhat or extremely safe. Now, I'm giving you the surface of this, and it goes a lot deeper, but fundamentally, that's the answer to how a proof of stake system works versus how a proof of work system works. And again, Bitcoin uses proof of work. Ethereum now uses proof of work, but is moving to proof of stake in the near future. Okay. And Bert's question, is there one universal blockchain? No, there are probably thousands of blockchains at this point. The biggest blockchain, meaning the longest blockchain, is the Ethereum blockchain because it was the first. But other blockchains have evolved. Some of them have forked off of blockchains. For example, there's something called Bitcoin Cash, which is a fork of the Bitcoin blockchain, meaning, and when I say a fork, that means they have the same pre-fork history, but they decided to do something different with their technology at a certain point, and now they have their own separate blockchain that after the fork is completely different than Bitcoin, but pre-fork is the same as Bitcoin. Okay. All right. So I get to the question of why so much hype around blockchains. One is the processing capacity. The blockchains give you near real-time access to data in a world where, again, more and more things are relying on huge amounts of data, and trying to keep those data in independent silos is expensive. It is risky because those independent data silos are also honeypots, meaning places where people want to attack. And they're also subject to human error because, well, you know, garbage in, garbage out. It's only as good as the system. And if you build a system that allows data to be checked and rechecked before it goes in, it becomes a much better system. And generally speaking, it's cheap. You know, Bitcoin as one of the blockchains, depending on how big the information and how much information you want to put into a block, it generally speaking is fairly cheap. But there have been other blockchains that are out there that are even less expensive, down to fractions of a penny to put a transaction on a blockchain. And one transaction I remember not too long ago was someone moved somewhere around $100 million using the Bitcoin network for about $12 in transaction fees. And if you think about moving that much money through a bank, well, you're never going to be able to do that with that kind of finality and at such a low cost. Okay. The other big benefit of these blockchains, it leverages technologies, and two of those technologies are smart contracts, which we're going to talk about quite a bit, and the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is simply the interconnectedness of devices across the internet using some kind of system. And that Internet of Things is going to allow things like smart cars, or in your refrigerator, when you're out of milk, it will send a message to your Amazon account saying, go to Whole Foods, or have Whole Foods send another gallon of milk the next time they deliver. That Internet of Things, that connected devices to the internet, to your personal life, is coming, and it's coming fairly soon. And you know, another big example is trucking. Right, we're not that far from trucks that are, for the most part, going to be self-driving trucks. Well, those self-driving trucks need a lot of information. And if all of that information is in a silo, any attack on that silo means your truck is sitting there And especially you have spoilage issues at that point. Well, if the data the truck needs is now on a blockchain with almost no downtime, now you don't have that issue any longer. And that's another big benefit or potential benefit of a blockchain. Right? And the last is the distributed consensus, the open source nature of it. Because it's open source, meaning anybody can look at the blockchain, anybody can audit the contracts and audit the software and do whatever. It is out there for everyone to see. And you have this community of people who want to build on this. It becomes a lot easier to trust it because it's harder to kind of defraud a large group of people. I'm not going to get into politics at this point, but generally speaking, if everyone has access to the information, you're not going to run into the same kinds of issues if only a limited number of people have access to information, right? And so ultimately that gets to this. Blockchains are trust machines. They allow technology to replace the trusted intermediaries in a lot of financial transactions. Okay. Where does it come from? The transparency, decentralization, consensus, game theory. Those are the big ways that blockchains help. Now, one thing, and I'm sure some of you may have this question is, well, what's the difference between blockchain and Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is the first example of a blockchain. Bitcoin was first, and the Bitcoin white paper really laid out how to do this, but Bitcoin is not blockchain. And for the most part, every blockchain that has been created since Bitcoin was released does something that Bitcoin doesn't do very well. Bitcoin does one thing very well. Those other blockchains do those other things. Right. Bitcoin, for the most part, is a new form of money. But now, blockchains have evolved into other areas. And those other areas are starting to bear fruit. They haven't really borne the fruit everyone, all the hype would suggest, but it's not that far down the road, right? And that's because of smart contracts. And smart contracts, as alluded to in the last slide, smart contracts are an important part of why blockchains are important, right? And so again, I'm not going to talk about smart contracts yet. I have a slide for that, but let's talk about why the market values these blockchains. And there are only two applications the market warrants. It says, yes, the market merits. One is money, right? That money is effectively, if you think about it, Bitcoin is kind of a substitute for money. And, the money governments issue is called fiat money, and Bitcoin is a substitute for that. It's a type of money that the government can't control. And a lot of people find value in that. But there's another kind of money that is used on blockchains. And I think for most of you listening to this, this is probably the more important type of money. And it's called stablecoins, right? And what stablecoins are crypto money that maintains a stable value relative to some other asset. And often that other asset, at least for people in the US, is the US dollar. And so there is a crypto out there, and there are a number of cryptos out there, whose value effectively is always going to, or is designed to always be $1. Now, and we're going to talk about those stable coins because I think it's important, particularly to this group. But the other thing is smart contracts. That's the other application the market merits. And what smart contracts do effectively is say, if you want to do this thing, here is the software that says, if you want this, then these things will happen. That's a very kind of 50,000 foot view of smart contracts, right? But those smart contracts are what enables the Internet of Things. It is an example I always like to use because you know, as we talked about, I went to the University of Maryland, and we generally, you know, I was there before they left the ACC and moved to the Big Ten. And generally, if you went to Maryland, you had an antipathy to Duke, because Duke and Maryland had a pretty good rivalry. And unfortunately, I'll say they were our rivals, but we weren't theirs. But the example I think I use in my book is, well, let's say I wanted to place a bet on the national championship basketball game and Maryland and Duke were playing. Well, that could be in a smart contract, meaning I could put, let's say, $100 of value into a smart contract. Someone else who wanted to bet on Duke could put $100 of value into a smart contract, and the smart contract would then do everything that Vegas or a bookie would do, except it wouldn't take a fee. And, you know, it would basically charge a transaction fee, but that might be 1/1000th of a cent. But that smart contract will do everything that the bookie does or Vegas does. But when you go to Vegas to place that bet, they're going to take 10% because they're being the trusted intermediary in that transaction. The blockchain and the smart contract can be the trusted intermediary. There's a smart contract that said, if you are willing to bet $100, 2-to-1 bet on Duke or Maryland, put your $100 in the smart contract. The blockchain will match someone who is on the opposite side of you. Then you have your smart contract. And then as soon as the game's over, and this is my hypo, so Maryland wins, the smart contract will pay me $200 minus the 0.001 cents. Okay, where does the smart contract reside? It resides on a blockchain. So if, you know, we're going to say Ethereum, because Ethereum is a better blockchain for smart contracts than Bitcoin, it would reside on the Ethereum blockchain. And you would enter into the smart contract on Ethereum. And one thing you know, some of you may have wondered, like, wait, how exactly does a smart contract know that Maryland won, right? And it knows that Maryland won through another application, which is called an oracle. And an oracle is integral to using smart contracts. But before I keep talking about smart contracts, let's get back to the money side, because I have better slides on smart contracts. All right. So let's talk about digital money. The most promising use case for crypto right now is money. And if you look at the market cap of the biggest cryptos, if you add all the monies, they're way more than everything else. Some people think that might change. No, not Mizzou KU. My son is going to KU, but I am an East Coast person, born and bred. So the most promising use case right now is money. Just look at the values. Now, some people are expecting that to change in the future, and it's called the flippening, and where they're expecting Ethereum to replace Bitcoin as far as having more value. Whether or not that happens, who knows? But right now, the best use case, the most active use case of crypto is money, right? And if you think about what money is, money does three things, and this has been true for history, right? It's a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. That is what the technology of money is. Every money does those three things, from the giant stones that people use for money in certain cultures to gold to diamonds. That is what money does. Every money has to do those three things. If it doesn't do those three things, it's not a money. You know, quite frankly, Chuck E. Cheese tokens can be money. But to be effective, money needs some other things, right? And here's just a list of those things. It needs to be scarce, verifiable, durable, portable, divisible, fungible, recognizable, and resistant to counterfeit. Every good money does those things, right? And if you just think about anything that serves as money, it is all of those things. And if you talk about history, the world's first money is gold. Why gold? Because it does all of those things, right? And we might say, well, gold is not very portable. Well, it's far more, it was far more portable in the day. And that's why so many ships were crossing the Atlantic and other places carrying gold, because it was portable. That was the technology of its day. The wire transfer of its day was taking a ship from Europe to the United States or to the Caribbean with gold. That was the way the world worked. As far as, and, taking another example, one of the ways that Rome used its economic system to create the Roman Empire was through the use of its money. And it used gold as one form of its money. And, for anybody interested, I seriously recommend Colleen McCullough's series on Rome. It's about 8 books of 1,000 pages, but it's actually pretty good. I digress. All right. And so the problem with Bitcoin as money is exemplified by that, the world's most expensive pizza. And you all may not know of the world's most expensive pizza, but it is not some Italian high-end brand of pizza. No, it is a Papa John's pizza. And Papa John's has created the world's most expensive pizza. How do I know this? Here's how. On May 22nd, back in 2010, someone said, hey, I want 2 pizzas. Pizza will cost $25. I don't have a credit card. If someone buys the pizza for me, I will send them some Bitcoin. And someone said, I'll do that. And they sent 10,000 Bitcoins for this person to buy the pizza. Now, at today's prices, that pizza was about $110 million for each pizza. Now, the funny thing about this slide is, I use this slide almost in every time I talk about crypto to anyone. And I've had to change this slide every time I give the presentation, because those pizzas have been as expensive as $300 million per pizza, and as low as around $60 billion per pizza. And that highlights the problem with Bitcoin, using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, is the price volatility. There is way too much price volatility for businesses to use Bitcoin in any meaningful way, which is one of the reasons we have stable coins. And stable coins are crypto that are pegged in value to some kind of stable asset like euros, US dollar, right? Again, here's just a 2-year look at the volatility of Bitcoin. And if you have payment obligations, you don't want that kind of volatility in your assets, because, it's great if it goes up, not so great if it goes down, right? And particularly if you're accepting Bitcoin, let's say when it was at 60,000 and it goes down to just north of 20,000 where it is now, and you have obligations, that's a risk that businesses just cannot take, right? So Bitcoin has generally, and I think even now, it serves as a store of value asset. And you might say, well, not doing so great as a store of value. Yeah, it depends on when you start looking. If you bought it, let's say 3rd or 4th quarter of 2021, yeah, not so great a store of value. If you bought it pretty much any time before 21, done pretty well as a store of value asset. And, historically, Bitcoin has generally outperformed almost every asset. And, in the last year, not so much, right? So again, that's why it's not useful as a medium of exchange, and it becomes an investment asset, right? And so people recognized early on there needed to be a way to have a crypto that had a stable value to be used as a medium of exchange asset, right? And so that's not only one of the reasons for stable coins, but this is a huge one, right? A lot of people in the world don't have access to bank accounts, and they're called the unbanked, but sometimes they do have cell phones. And if you have a crypto account with a stable asset, you effectively have a bank account. You have a way to store your assets. And if you're accepting, let's say you're in a village and people can pay you in crypto, you don't have any of that transmission issue of, oh, how do I get the money from A to B? When I was in Cape Town, one of the issues was, well, they can't even get money from point A to point B because it's a 3-hour truck ride to restock the ATMs. And so people are charging fairly exorbitant fees just to be able to transact. Well, if you can transact with a cell phone and a QR code using a stable coin, you've solved a lot of the problems you otherwise would have. So another benefit or use of stable coins is it provides a stable form of money for people living in places with unstable currencies. And here's just, again, this fairly old data, but it's not that much different now, is if you look at some of these places, Venezuela, Zimbabwe being, two of the biggest historically with rampant inflation. And, at a time in Venezuela, prices were doubling every week or so. And think about the person who sells a house in Venezuela, right? You sell your house on day one, a week later, you're ready to buy the next house, but you've lost half your value, right? And so in that kind of situation, if you sell the house, you immediately convert it into a stable coin. A week later, you convert it back to buy the house, you've maintained your value. And again, very simple use case for a stable coin, particularly in a government or a location without a stable currency, right? And lastly, having a stable coin means you don't have to convert your crypto into fiat to get it into a banking system, right? Because, and doing that requires a lot of steps, right? You have to go to the bank and then you're like, well, I want to do this. Like, nah. If you can just keep it in crypto and keep your value in crypto and know that that value is not going to change, you might not earn anything on it, but that's not the point of a stable coin is to earn. It's to maintain value as a medium of exchange. Now you can use these stable coins as a way to do a lot of things you otherwise would do without having that cost of converting it to cash. I have a very small practice, and a lot of my clients now pay me in stablecoin. And for the most part, I love it because it makes everything so much simpler. I don't have to use Square, and Square charges me a 3% fee every time a client wants to do that. And to the extent that I need to move that into physical cash, then I have to go through the bank accounts, and that takes a couple of days. But for the most part, I don't have to do that except for trust account transactions. And that's because under the law, I have to maintain certain client funds in a trust account. So I have to then move those funds out of crypto into a bank account to put it into a trust account. But after I onboard a client, it's pretty much pay as you go. And at that point, accepting payment in crypto is very good. And all of my employees accept crypto as payment. So they're happy, I'm happy, and it's a far more seamless set of transactions. They can see exactly when they're paid. There's no, did it get into my bank account yet? Oh, they're holding the money for 3 days. No, none of that. I moved the transaction at 10 at 10:01, they see a receipt that says, yes, I have the funds, and we're done. Right? And so when you talk about these stable coins, like, okay, well, are there any? Yeah, I'm like, and these are, or were, we'll talk about that in a second, some of the bigger ones, like USD, what's called USDC is the one in the top left. To me, that's the best one. I'll get into that a little bit. But there's Tether, there's DAI, there's BUSD, which is Binance's. Binance is the second largest exchange in the US. I think globally, they're the #1 exchange. There was one called Terra. But Terra failed spectacularly in the last month. And I think it was within the month. So their stable coin went from $1 to 0. Actually, not technically 0, it's 0.000, like 23 the last time I checked. But that highlights a risk, because to understand how a stable coin works is an extremely important thing before you use stable coins. And so if you think about what happened, and I'll explain what happened with Terra and their Terra USD. Well, long story short, the algorithm failed. They had an algorithm that said, we'll do this and we'll do this and this, and it was called an algorithmic stablecoin, meaning they were going to issue more or burn or buy some back to maintain the peg. Theoretically, it sounds like a good idea, but practically speaking, it didn't work. And so other stable coins say, no, we're not doing that. We're backed by assets. Regular old assets held in regular old financial institutions. And so if you think about what happened with Terra, it's kind of a similar story, right? Because it's happened before. It happened with Lehman, it happened with Bear, and happened with long-term capital management. Fundamentally, the algorithm failed, right? And in long-term capital management, it's truly an algorithm. But in Lehman and Bear, it's like, oh, let's take on this amount of leverage and do these kinds of things, and let's just assume real estate prices never go down. Well, bad algorithm, bad result, right? And so this is kind of the big question. Can you trust these things? Because again, if you're in business, you don't want to take on any other kind of risk. And trusting stablecoins could be a risk. And so, here I just pulled the top 5 stablecoins and what their market cap is. And, these are fairly significant market caps, like Tether and USDC, 72 billion and $54 billion respectively. And you see some of the other ones like HUSD, again, it's only 286 million. And one of the things that you can do is you can look at the price of these stable coins going back years. And generally speaking, it's not perfect. It's not a one-to-one correlation perfectly. Like, you will not see a straight line at $1 across X number of years, but you will see that kind of deviation. It might go to 0.99, it might go to 101. I think if you look at it, there have been a few times where you might have seen 97, and for at least Tether. And Tether has an interesting story. I don't have enough time to get into it, but from I trust what they're doing standpoint, USDC is just a little bit more transparent about what they're doing than Tether is. And so to the extent that, I accept crypto as payment, I accept USDC, I will not accept Tether. And again, it's not that much risk, but I'm not willing to take that risk at all, right? And speaking of Tether, there is how they're backed 1-to-1. Cash and short-dated government obligation, always redeemable. They publish a report every month by Grant Thornton, right? Telling you exactly what their balances are. And they have licenses pretty much in every state. And I think it's 46 because not every state has a licensing regime. But again, if I'm going to trust that, and I need to know that my assets are backed dollar for dollar, I'm going to use Tether. I'm sorry, I'm going to use USDC because the transparency of what they're doing makes a lot more sense to me than some of the others. Now, and this is another reason why this is important, because, you know, in March, the White House said, hey, we're getting into this space as well through what is called a central bank digital currency. And what a central bank digital currency is a digital dollar, meaning you will be able to have a dollar backed by this government the same way the US dollar is in some kind of digital account in the near future. Now, the White House has said they're exploring it, but right now, hundreds of countries, over 100 countries, are looking at issuing CBDCs because it solves a lot of problems. You know, let's just think back of COVID and using the IRS to pay those COVID relief funds. And, you know, people were getting checks from the IRS. Well, if you want to stimulate the economy and get money to people, going through the IRS is not exactly the most efficient way to do it. Why don't you just move the money into their accounts? Well, with a CBDC, you can actually do that. And you can do things, you know, there's some very interesting public policy issues here, like you can move money into their accounts and say, you have to spend it in 30 days if you really want to get the economy going, right? Now, the ethics and the politics of that, different issue. Another issue is, well, that means the government knows where you spend your money. Again, different issue. But you can use a CBDC, and I'm sure you'll be able to use these CBDCs to move to stable coins, because at least then you have some semblance of financial privacy, right? And so I'm just going to go through some of the issues in the executive order, right? They say they're going to explore it. They want to build the infrastructure to do it, and they want to protect American interests. And what they mean is there's a big financial privacy issue with respect to the government issued coin, because it's everything that's spent is going to be in the government database. So the Federal Reserve is involved in this, and you know they've done a number of papers that laid out some of these issues. And you know, if you're interested, those papers are out there, fairly easy to find. And it will also facilitate lots of different international transactions, because this US CBDC is going to be able to be used across the globe. And that means there's going to be a lot of coordination among countries. Now, if you think about it politically, what the US wants to do is maintain dollar supremacy across the globe, right? That is a big part of the policy of the US government, is they want to make sure the dollar is supreme. And if you go back in history, we've done some things to make sure that happens. Like, for example, to make sure that you can't buy oil in Russian rubles. Why? Because we want to maintain the dollar's supremacy. Right. So finally, get to smart contracts. And I apologize for going so fast, but there's a lot of stuff to cover. So smart contracts, all they are lines of computer code in a blockchain to verify contractual obligations have been met and payments can be issued. That's it. It's just a series of instructions. When this shipment of X is scanned in this port, I will release payment. Done. So now you don't have those issues of, well, is it there yet? Well, okay, once it's there, let me know, and then I'll send you a check. No, it's automatic. When it's scanned at destination, the money moves, and the smart contract does that. But you can also build in a lot more functionality into that smart contract. So it's not just the product has arrived, but the supply chain of that product, meaning, you know, let's use coffee, for example, because again, I drink a lot of coffee. the coffee was grown on this farm. It was harvested on this date. It was roasted by these people, and it was certified organic on this date. All of that is in the same smart contract. So now when that smart contract arrives, or when the coffee arrives, it's going to have all that history in it. And so now if that history is not there, there's no payment. And so you eliminate the ability of having to go back, or the need to have to go back and check all of that stuff in order to ensure that you got the product you wanted. Now, there's always an issue of, well, how do I make sure that all that data is good data? That is an issue. And once these systems start to really get going, that issue is probably going to go away. Okay, question was, what happens if there's no funds in the smart contract? You can't do that. If there's no funds in the smart contract, you can't enter into the smart contract. The smart contract is going to hold the funds. And, and that's going to create security on everybody's part, because they're like, oh, I have to do this with the hope that you're going to pay me. Like, no. Put the money in a smart contract. I will make sure I do everything I have to do so that that smart contract releases the funds, and that both parties will be able to see everything in those smart contracts to know, okay, I know exactly what has to be done to get paid. And that's a huge benefit for the supply chain, right? Because it takes out so many of the issues. And I have a few videos that we're going to get to that kind of lay this out in a little bit more detail. And they're all examples of smart contracts, smart contract platforms used in the supply chain, right? Right. And so again, this is technically what a smart contract is going to look like. There's a contract, there are going to be events, there's going to be execution and transfer of value, and settlement. And that settlement can be something like digital on-chain assets, or it could be an off-chain. For example, you can't take this out of the factory until payment is made. Okay, because there's a smart contract that will unlock the door. And that door will not unlock until payment is made, right? You can build smart contracts to do lots and lots of things in the business world, particularly with respect to supply chain type issues. Okay, so again, now downside of smart contracts, not even downside, but just a different aspect of smart contract is, one, they have no jurisdiction. They exist on the blockchain. Well, anonymous attendee, yeah, what about customs? Yeah, governments have to get involved, right? Because to the extent the government has an interest in certain things, then the government can also look at these smart contracts and agree to let certain things in if it has the right provenance. That is where the government is going to be involved in this, but it's going to take out a lot of the inefficiency in that customs process, right? And that's a huge benefit to a lot of players, except the intermediaries, the people who are basically holding out their hand to make sure that this gets done in the right way. Well, if everything's automated, those intermediaries are going to get squeezed out of the market. And what that means for employment is a completely different issue and beyond the scope of this presentation, but it's going to squeeze employment because there are a lot of people in the middle of transactions effectively extracting rents and saying, oh, because we facilitate this, we will get paid. Well, you don't need those people, or you're going to need fewer of those people in the future, right? So again, back to the issue, jurisdiction, anonymity. In some case, you don't have to let the other party know who you are in a smart contract. Like in my Maryland Duke example, I don't know who's, disturbed enough to want to support Duke. I don't care. I only care that they have $100 they're willing to lose when Maryland wins. Now, in the supply chain, there's no anonymity, right? You want to know exactly who provided the product and when. So that's not going to be an issue. Also, enforcement of disputes. disputes are going to arise, but you can, I always use the example, what if Duke won, but then they found out that Duke has 3 former NBA players on their squad, and the NCAA finally figures this out a week later? Well, the smart contract can't really do anything about that. Smart contract is just going to look at who won the game at that night after they verify that Duke actually won, even though they cheated because they're Duke. And if I wanted to go and sue somebody and say, hey, wait a minute, I want my $100 back, I'm out of luck, because the smart contract says, nope, conditions have been met, we're done. And I don't know who's on the other side of that transaction. But in the supply chain, you're going to build in some of that dispute resolution issue, right? That's going to be built into your smart contract. And this is where good lawyers are going to come in, say, hey, wait a minute. And these are lawyers who understand how to program smart contracts, or at least how to understand smart contracts. And I tell my students, like, you better understand enough about this place, because if you are a business lawyer, this is something you're going to need to know. Right? All right. And so, here's some simple, I have some smart contract examples. Right? Sending someone crypto is a smart contract, effectively. It's a very simple one. Instruction, as soon as you can, move X number of Bitcoin to this person, right? Buying digital content stream. Again, I put in, 0.4 Bitcoin, I get access to the highlights of the South African rugby team. Okay, great. Right. Now we get into some more, like, okay, landlord remotely locks non-paying tenant out of apartment. Ooh, lots of issues there, right? In the US, that's illegal, but it might not be illegal in other places, and you can do that. Like, oh, you don't get into the unit unless you make payment. Or buying a house, use a smart contract. Say, hey, once you prove title, and you prove funds that, the buyer's funds, then the lender can participate in the smart contract and say, all right, the buyer's done everything they need to do, we'll put in our money, and then transfer title. You don't need all those other parties at the table. You can do it in, about 3 or 4 minutes if you build your smart contracts correctly. Right? Now you get into some of the more interesting ones, right? You can use them you can have an autonomous business unit. Let's say you have smart trucks, right? Those smart trucks can do whatever they need to do. They're going to make their deliveries. They're going to, do everything. Someone scans a QR code, will open the truck, and there it is. And then people will take the assets out of the truck, scan a QR code, the truck closes, drives back to the warehouse. All of those things can be done in a smart contract on a blockchain, right? And again, some of the more other ones, and these get into the very complex, like your government can be self-enforcing, at least for some fairly small areas. But again, this is just a highlight of some of the things that you can do with these smart contracts, right? And then lastly, and I won't spend too much time on this, DApps are effectively the user interface to allow you to use a smart contract. And the reason they're different is most user interfaces now report to a central database, whereas a DApp is going to report to a decentralized space, and that decentralized space could be a blockchain. And I only added this slide, this is one of the slides I use on a more technical presentation, but it kind of shows where a blockchain comes in, because it's those DApps that are the applications. Like, I would have to enter my bet on Maryland through a DApp, and the DApp would broadcast across that network to find someone who wanted to bet on Duke. Right. Again, the biggest, the most dominant DApp and smart contract platform is Ethereum. It's launched in 2015, open sourced, uses its own crypto ETH. It enables smart contracts. Again, very little downtime, no fraud. And you know, some of you may say, but wasn't there a big hack and someone stole $50 million on Ethereum doing something called the DAO? Well, yes, the DAO hack happened, but it had no effect. It didn't happen on the Ethereum blockchain. It happened on an on-ramp or off-ramp of the Ethereum blockchain. The blockchain itself had no issues. So the blockchain did what it was supposed to do. The software coders messed up, and there was a crack in the code and allowed them to divert funds from certain Ethereum accounts to the hacker. And you know, there's a long, complicated story about that I do not have time to get into. But again, this is why effectively Ethereum wants to be Windows for blockchain. And that's really the best way to describe it. They want to be the operating platform for all smart contracts. And you know, that raises the question, well, why hasn't there been a killer app yet? You know, everything you said, Professor Wright, sounds really, really good, but why isn't it useful? Like, why haven't everybody just jumped to doing everything on these smart contracts and using these platforms that are cheaper, they're more transparent, all these benefits? Why is there no killer app, right? And the answer is scalability. Scalability. And there are other answers, but this is the biggest one, right? To be mainstream, to be scalable, to have a killer app, you have to be able to operate at scale. And right now, blockchains simply can't operate at scale. And part of the reason is what's called the blockchain trilemma. You can have a secure blockchain, you can have a decentralized blockchain, and you can have a fast blockchain, but you can't have all three. And you can think about it like if you hire a plumber. You can have a good plumber, you can have a cheap plumber, and you can have a fast plumber, but you cannot get all three in the same plumber, right? Blockchains have that same trilemma, right? And here's an example of what that looks like in real world, right? Visa can execute about 24,000 transactions per second. Ethereum can transact about 20. And if you remember earlier in this presentation, I said, well, Ethereum's moving to proof of stake. Well, one of the reasons they're moving to proof of stake is, according to them, they should be able to execute about 100,000 transactions per second once they move over to proof of stake. It's complicated. There are lots of other things that have to happen. But fundamentally, if they can do 100,000 transactions per second, you are more than likely going to see a killer app come out of Ethereum, because people are like, hey, wait a minute, we can do this cheaper. And right now, Visa charges roughly 3 to 3.5% per transaction. And if you think about how much money Visa makes, if you're all of that value that Visa gets to be a trusted intermediary, and that's really all they are, is a trusted intermediary. If that value can go back to the users and out of Visa, it's going to happen, because again, it's your money. And if you would rather spend an extra 3.5%, yeah, okay, go ahead. But most people will say, no, I think I'll keep that 3.5%. So before I jump into the supply chain part, any technical kind of questions on blockchains? And you know, I know I've been answering them a lot, but I want to, before I jump into kind of the supply chain side, I wanted to give people a chance to ask any questions. 3, 2, 1, no questions. All right, let's keep moving so that I can try to get through this whole slide deck, which is always a challenge. All right, so the supply chain thesis is, right, if assets are digitized, then this supply chain thing sounds like a great idea, right? And that means you could trade them, pledge them, finance them, find them all across the global economy very, very efficiently, right? And so we'll start with this one.
The world has experienced a substantial technological revolution over the past decades. Some of these technologies that might come to mind include artificial intelligence, virtual reality, Internet of Things, and an emerging technology referred to as blockchain. In the simplest terms, blockchain can be described as a data structure that holds transactional records while also ensuring security, transparency, and decentralization. A blockchain is a distributed ledger that is completely open to any and everyone on the network. You can also think of it as a chain of records stored in a sequential order, which are controlled by no single authority. Blockchain can be directly applied in today's global supply chains, comprised of a complex web of trading partners and trusted third parties. Each party within the supply chain maintains their own centralized systems, and subsequently partners face significant challenges trying to synchronize the data representing the flow of goods and services with the actual flow of goods and services. In the book, Blockchains for Business, Dr. Lassity states that while manufacturers, exporters, couriers, freight forwarders, customers, inspectors, exporters, shippers, and importers are moving physical goods, they are also creating data around the movements with the bill of lading, certifications, and consignments. With so many moving parts, there are bound to be issues that arise. The product supply chain is facing several key problems related to trust, reliance on numerous third parties, and a lack of visibility into the supply chain that can have a deep effect on the customer's perception of the products that they purchase. Let's take a closer look at how blockchain provides efficiency, transparency, decentralization, and security to the entire supply chain system to resolve these issues. Fraud is a huge issue within the global supply chain, specifically related to organized retail crime, return fraud, and false declines of payments. Currently, the global value of counterfeit goods is estimated at 1.2 trillion and could reach as high as 2.3 trillion in the year 2022, according to the Global Brand Counterfeiting Group. Blockchain solutions can solve the fraud problem by tracing the proof of origin, which proves the documentation of the originating manufacturer of the product. By tracking the parts throughout the assembly process for more visibility into the individual product components, blockchain provides a picture of the product's life cycle from the origin all the way to the customer. A second major issue within the global supply chain centers around food safety. 1 in 10 people fall ill every year from eating contaminated food, and 420,000 people die each year as a result, according to the World Health Organization. Food safety is actually taken very seriously, so whenever there is an outbreak, retailers like Walmart opt to remove the contaminated food off of the shelves to avoid public consumption. After all, when it comes to food safety, everyone is guilty until proven innocent. This type of response comes with a financial cost of a lack of sales and a waste of food that is not even contaminated. In 2018, during the E. coli breakout of romaine lettuce, 210 people were affected across 36 states, along with 5 additional salmonella outbreaks across multiple retailers. Typically, it would take retailers 7 days to trace the exact source of the contaminated food, but with blockchain technology, Walmart can trace food as far back as the grower in a mere 2.2 seconds. This drastic improvement puts safety first, saves companies money, and prevents food waste, all thanks to the blockchain. So we have already established that there are multiple siloed third parties trying to work together all throughout the supply chain. Now imagine the exponential amount of paperwork that is created and transferred between each member performing a distinct role. Some 200 documents are exchanged in each shipment, along with 300 people on average being involved in each shipment for the world's trading ecosystem, according to the Bangkok Post. There is also a lack of trust when it comes to communication and documentation between multiple players using multiple sources of information. The supply chain is very complicated, and with many moving parts, there are bound to be errors that can cost companies money, a lack of efficiency, and loss of time due to reconciling records between entities. These issues are solved with the use of blockchain due to its creation of a single source of truth. This single source of information can be utilized by manufacturers, carriers, merchants, and many more participants to provide a comprehensive view of each participant's actions that is captured by the blockchain. Beyond the benefits of information, there is also the benefit of decreasing costs by using digital ownership certificates and integrated financial transactions that is possible due to blockchain technology. The World Trade Organization stated that the global GDP would increase as much as 5% or more, and trade volume would increase as much as 15% if logistical barriers were removed from the international supply chain.
If I were a student today in the Walton College, I would make sure that I understood what blockchain was. You don't have to, if you're a business person, you don't have to be a programmer. Some of you might want to program, but you really don't need to do that. Most of the breakthroughs that are going to come from blockchain are going to be a result of new processes that are possible.
As a student, there are multiple ways that you can.
All right, since I doubt
get
any of
plugged
you
into the
will be students, I will move on. So again, and that highlights it. Walmart has been a leader in this space because, again, Walmart is the low-cost provider, and they figured out that, hey, we can do a lot of these things a lot cheaper and more efficiently if we use a blockchain. Now, you know, Walmart can afford to deploy these systems because of their size, but as blockchains mature, more that's going to come down farther and farther. And we have some examples of that, right? And so again, some of the benefits of the blockchain is just these, right? You know, you don't have to do the physical, you don't have to go and check the source. You're like, no, it's there because again, the data is going to show it's there. And it allows a lot more efficient processes, right? And, you know, here, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but if you just think about it, right? This is, you know, the next series of slides just lays out the inventory or the process of a transaction, right? You place the order, you add a couple of blocks. So that information is added to the blockchain, right? Then you get a loan from the bank. Again, everything's on the blockchain. You have supplier invoices and shipping added to the blockchain. So all of this data is now in the blockchain. Pays for the merchandise, supplier repays the bank closes the loan record, and you return unsold or damaged merchandise. Excuse me. Now, again, this is a kind of a transitory system because maybe you don't even need the bank if you're using crypto, but assuming you are, all of that data is now in a blockchain. So when you want to find out what happened, there is a universal true source of data for you to go back and find that information out, right? And, you know, and again, this is a Harvard Business Review example of how to use the blockchain in a supply chain in an order type situation, right? And so, again, now we're going to talk about one of the issues that I'm sure some of you thought about, like, wait, how do you actually turn this crypto into money? Right? And that's why we talked about it, right? And so right now, this would be the simplest way. And, you know, their Coinbase, which is the largest US crypto exchange, has crypto business accounts. And, you know, they are fairly easy to get. And if you want to convert your crypto into dollars or your dollars into crypto, you can just do it through Coinbase, right? And again, it's a fairly seamless transaction. And, you know, it might take a few days right now because of the way the system is set up. But as that system evolves, that's going to change because in the future, most banks are just going to allow you to do this directly. Some of the big banks, I think Chase, JP Morgan, I know JP Morgan because Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, has been very critical of crypto until last year when he said, oh yeah, we're going to start doing this. So, you know, he kind of backtracked on that. But big banks are starting to get into this game. So you won't even need to use something like a Coinbase, right? Again, it's coming soon. It's not here yet, or it's here in some banks, some niche banks. There's actually a bank in Wyoming, Anchor, I can't remember the name, it's not Anchor, but there's a bank in Wyoming that just got its charter. Now, they ran into issues because they're still trying to figure this out, and they were hit with a penalty from their bank regulator. Now, it wasn't a penalty about them doing something illegal or fraudulent. It was a penalty about being able to reconcile their existing systems with what the banking regulator required. But as that business becomes more mature, the transaction costs are going to go down, and it's going to be far more seamless for businesses to use, straight crypto to fiat, going through their own banking institution. And so again, what blockchains can do in exports are allow you to consolidate, speed up your supply chain, verify data, see exactly where things are in the lifestyle in real time. If you are wondering where your ship is in the Suez Canal, you'll be able to pull it up, and like the Walmart example, 2.2 seconds, you'll know exactly where your ship is, right? And that is going to help in those areas, right? Again, hard to counterfeit if you can track the source of data, because think about the consumer who goes in and scans a QR code. That QR code has to go back to a blockchain that is going to have that information. You can't just spoof a QR code because it's, the consumer is going to know, oh, that's not the right blockchain. Someone created this random thing. I'm not going to trust this thing. And there are lots of value in having your consumers understand the provenance of everything and being able to supply that information. Or alternatively, sometimes, if you are an intermediary retailer, you might not want people to know where you are sourcing your information, but you can create a smart contract that says, we can verify that it was grown in this region, and you can limit the type of information someone can have if there are competition issues in providing too much information. And so, another quick video.
A typical agricultural supply chain involves complex interconnected processes between various stakeholders, such as the producer, inspection and insurance companies, logistics and shipping agencies, banks, manufacturer and importer, before it reaches a consumer sitting in another corner of the globe. However, in this long process, there are quite a few challenges. Importers find it difficult to track provenance, to understand the place of origin and quality of the imported produce. As the produce moves between multiple stakeholders, the ownership or custodian information becomes difficult to trace. Centralized bodies, especially private agencies that certify crop produce, may not be trusted by international importers. Information flow between stakeholders is sequential, leading to potential delays in downstream decision-making. Overall, stakeholders lack transparency in this process and lose track of relevant transactions. So, how do we tackle these challenges? Introducing Infosys Blockchain. Any activity can be documented and stored in the distributed ledger only with consensus among all participating stakeholders, thus making the network more trustworthy than any individual entity. Untrusted stakeholders can transact amongst each other through smart contracts without the need for a centralized body. Every stakeholder will have their own copy of the same distributed ledger, which enables information access in near real time. Meet Raj Kishore from Uttar Pradesh, who specializes in mango cultivation. Every year, Raj sells a bulk of his mango produce to Mohan, who owns the Royal Pulp Factory in Uttar Pradesh. Mohan, in turn, receives an order to export mango pulp to Charles Becker, who owns Becker Packaged Foods in Germany. He will add details about his crops, request inspections, and get his produce insured at the right time. The contracts between Raj and Mohan, as well as between Mohan and Charles, are stored on the blockchain network as smart contracts. Relevant stakeholders certify the produce with standard certificates. Once the mangoes are harvested, Raj generates the invoice and requests a pickup. The logistics company picks these mangoes up from Raj's farm and delivers it to Mohan's warehouse. The delivery receipt is updated and made available to all stakeholders on the network. Once Mohan accepts the consignment, the smart contract between Mohan and Raj is executed, and Mohan's bank will be notified to initiate an open account transfer to Raj Kishore's bank. The transaction details will then be updated on the blockchain network. Meanwhile, Mohan is busy making mango pulp to be delivered to Charles Becker. The pulp is inspected and certified as well. Mohan then issues an invoice to Charles. Charles tracks the provenance of the product entirely from where the mangoes were cultivated to the inspection and insurance details before accepting the invoice. Mohan then raises a shipment request with the shipping company. Once the bill of lading is uploaded by the shipping company, the smart contract between Mohan and Charles gets executed, and Charles's bank initiates a payment to Mohan's bank. The transaction details are updated on the network. Thus, Charles, sitting in Germany, is able to remotely track the provenance of the mango pulp imported from India. Emphasis blockchain simplifies life for everyone in the supply chain. It ensures that all stakeholders gain transparency in every transaction through a trustworthy private network and increases the acceptance of Indian produce globally.
Okay, and that's a good example. And one of the things there is that's a private blockchain, meaning it is a blockchain that Infosys has created to allow kind of a trusted network of people to interact. And that's certainly an option, particularly in the supply chain area, as long as everyone's effectively on the same playbook. Now, that's not always true. And there are some public blockchain options for that, and we're going to get to that. And I think, we'll probably be running out of time soon, but that will kind of highlight the other option, right? But, if you think about supply chain, the issues that you all probably know very, very well, right? How do you digitize this information? How do you stop human error or mischief? How do you govern this thing? How do you keep certain information confidential? This is complex, right? You're all sitting through a presentation on this, and this is a 10,000-foot presentation. It's not 50,000, but it's also not on the ground, right? Doing this requires a lot of kind of upfront effort to get it set up, but then it should pretty much operate on its own, right? And then how do you incentivize people to do this, right? Because again, everybody has to change the way they're doing business, especially tracking and entering things into a smart contract and doing all that. And there has to be some incentive to participate, right? Interoperability. What if, Infosys is one system and someone else is using a different system? Can they talk to each other? And what is the cost of setting up this network? What is all of those costs? They're issues, right? And again, the legal obstacles. You talked about customs and regulation. There are certainly issues that have to be resolved, but given the value in this system, those issues are probably going to be resolved because, again, especially when you have leaders like Walmart saying, hey, wait a minute, we want to get this done because if we can drive down prices, and that's what Walmart does, they drive down prices, it creates a benefit between the consumer and Walmart. And Walmart wants to create as much efficiency in the process of sourcing assets and then selling assets. And this is going to allow them to do this. If I can imagine going to a store and, let's say you want to make sure, and, I know this is kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent, but there is an issue of, well, where is your beef sourced? And there's an Australian blockchain company that works with China so that the Chinese consumer can go in and know they are getting authentic Australian beef by scanning a QR code. And Australian beef is a big deal in China, but there are lots of people who try to say, oh, this is Australian beef, when in fact it's not. Well, that blockchain solution allows them to say, no, this is really good Australian beef. Here's how. You can find out what farm it was grown on and how it got to be on this shelf in China, right? And so, here's some of the bigger companies out there that are exploring using blockchain and some of the industries. And, we're going to talk about one, or I'm going to have a video on one, VeChain. And VeChain is a pretty good example of a public option for using this system. And what VeChain offers is what's called blockchain as a service. And you've probably heard of software as a service. They are blockchain as a service. You say, we're going to implement your system, and pretty much you do it through them. And they do a lot of the work of setting up the system using VeChain. And, without me trying to explain it, I will just let the video explain how it works.
Have you ever walked around the streets of Soho? If you've never visited New York City, there's everything you would expect, the good and the bad, the bright lights and the big buildings, but there's also muggers and grifters. Welcome to Whiteboard Crypto, the #1 YouTube channel for crypto education. And here we explain topics of the cryptocurrency world using analogies, stories, and examples so that you can easily understand them. In this video, we're going to explain what VeChain is, how it works, and the history of its development. Let's dig in. The downtown area of Soho is one of the best shopping districts in the world, but with the glamorous fashion shows and boutique stores also come the, well, not so boutique stores. And by not so boutique, I mean guys on the street handing out flyers, trying to pass off their clearly fake Louis Vuitton bags to the pedestrian tourists who have spent all day eyeing the real version in stores, but deciding that they're too expensive. And the real ones are too expensive, which means the guys selling the replicas on the street can sometimes make good money from the counterfeit bags. But now imagine that you're Louis Vuitton walking down the same street. Sorry, not that you're the Louis Vuitton, but imagine you represent the company Louis Vuitton. I'll explain how this ties into VeChain in a minute. So you walk down the street in Soho, watching a guy with dozens of fake bags laid out on a blanket, acting like they're the same ones that you make a lot of money selling. They're clearly ripping you off, and it's costing your company money. But what can you do about it? To paraphrase a saying you hear all over the internet, VeChain fixes this. At its most basic, you can think of VeChain as a supply chain solution on a blockchain. Now, first of all, what is a supply chain solution? Well, it authenticates and tracks goods that travel around the world with many different stops to end up in the hands of consumers. And it's not just Louis Vuitton or other luxury brands that can benefit from this. Any company that wants to keep track of everything that it manufactures and sells can use a solution like this. In fact, BMW is using VeChain today to track and prevent odometer fraud. Walmart actually uses VeChain to track some of their food supply. But this isn't the full potential, however. For example, what if pharmaceutical companies could track the drugs that they make all the way to the consumer to make sure there's no skimming, no stealing, and no leaking? What if consumers could track where their food comes from to make sure that it's always safe to eat? In short, VeChain is an enterprise-level blockchain solution that helps companies track products from manufacturer to consumer, ensuring quality and helping companies pinpoint any issues or discrepancies. So VeChain tracks stuff going from one place to another. So what? You might even be wondering, why can't companies do this without VeChain? We already have the internet. That statement would be 100% true. Supply chains have actually been managed using RFID, NFC, and QR codes connected to databases for years. These methods are still used by VeChain, but are used slightly different. The old methods like RFID are still used, but they are now integrated into a system that utilizes two things. One, the Internet of Things, which basically means that at different points in the supply chain, Devices are connected to the internet to make sure that they have done what they needed to do. As a quick example, the retailer marks that all the goods in a shipment are accounted for. They then transmit this information over, and you guessed it, number 2, to the VeChain blockchain. This information is stored in the blockchain where it stays forever and anyone can verify it. Now, if this sounds like mumbo jumbo to you so far, it's because VeChain is a solution for businesses, not for specific people. It's tracking, automating, and accounting for a massive amount of important data that you and other consumers probably don't really care about, but big companies do. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't invest in it or even find a use of the technology for yourself, though. This new method emphasizes the integrity of that data, a key feature for luxury brands who lose billions to counterfeiting and food companies that need to pinpoint exactly where the supply chain issues occur. If you already know a little bit about cryptocurrencies and understand exactly how a blockchain works, the advantage should be clear. Blockchains aren't just data storage systems like the old one. They ensure that the data can't be manipulated, erased, or tampered with as soon as it's in a block. The advantage of VeChain over old supply chain solutions is similar to the advantage that Bitcoin has over other digital ledgers. VeChain, though, does work differently from Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. There's a lot to sort out in this video, so let's start by defining the VeChain ecosystem. By itself, VeChain is just a blockchain. In fact, when Sunny Lu, who is actually the former CIO of Louis Vuitton in China, launched it in 2015, it simply used the Ethereum blockchain. Now, if you don't understand the difference between a coin and a token, you should definitely go watch our video on that. In short, VeChain was initially a token on the Ethereum blockchain. Back then, VeChain was represented by VEN, but in June of 2018, VeChain transitioned to its own blockchain. So that way it wasn't limited by Ethereum's capabilities, and this transition carried with it some important changes. Number 1, VeChain is now represented by VET, which is a token that lets people actually use the VeChain blockchain. Just like using Bitcoin Network would require you to send and receive Bitcoin, VeChain's blockchain requires using VET tokens. These tokens function basically like many of other cryptocurrencies. Number 2, here's the confusing part. VeChain also uses another token, VTHO. Now this might seem complicated, but we're going to make the difference really clear here. VET is the stuff that you're actually transferring. VTHO is what you use to facilitate a transaction. For example, VET is the car and VTHO is the gas. Ethereum actually works in a very similar manner, except Ethereum is the car and the gas. Now you might be wondering why, and that brings us to number 3. According to Peter Jones, the chief scientist at VeChain, VTHO is used to make sure that VeChain does not suffer from extreme volatility like many other cryptocurrencies. Because they only use one as the medium of exchange and the other to pay for transactions, also because VTHO can be adjusted by the VeChain Foundation, they can make sure that the companies which rely on it can maintain stable transaction fees. Moving on, what consensus model does VeChain use? Because VeChain is also interesting because the model they use to achieve consensus is different than Ethereum and Bitcoin. Because a blockchain is decentralized, you have a lot of different nodes or different people or organizations that try to achieve consensus, making sure that nobody cheats or tries to double spend their money. In Bitcoin, they use a proof of work mechanism, and many altcoins, they use a proof of stake mechanism. We actually have separate videos on each of these topics, and I highly recommend watching them if you want to understand how VeChain works. Now, in a proof of stake system, you can protect the value of a coin by making sure that the people making decisions about the coin are the ones who actually hold it. In short, they have a stake. In VeChain, though, they use a variation of proof of stake called proof of authority. Instead of staking or proving who has the most of the coin in order to make decisions, the VeChain Foundation chooses which nodes are certified authorities, hence the name proof of authority. This means that the coin is actually quite centralized. However, due to the nature of B2B operations, many companies are okay with this. They're concerned more about speed and less about security. These huge companies which are relying on the VeChain blockchain to be accurate want to make sure that it is in good hands. So the VeChain Foundation chooses the nodes that end up actually producing blocks which are added to the blockchain, although nodes are obligated to stake at least 25 million VET, which is a lot of money right now. This also makes sense. They want the nodes they give authority to have a real interest in the defense of the blockchain. Moving on, a little bit about its history. Although VeChain was only started in 2015, it has since inked deals with PricewaterhouseCoopers, the Chinese government, and has explored options with the car behemoth BMW. But critics point to the last year as its struggle as the world has changed. During a supply chain crisis, we would expect new technologies like VeChain to benefit. But companies actually have taken a slightly more conservative approach, resorting to older systems and scaling back experimental new projects. There's also speculation that VeChain's blockchain may be useful, but that their token may never take off. Due to its specific use cases in the business world, unlike something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, which has a very broad range of use cases. Regardless of where this project ends up, the idea is certainly there, and supply chain management may be in for a complete transformation due to blockchain technology, whether it's VeChain or something else that is waiting in the mind of an engineer right now. Wrapping up this video, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. We hope that you've enjoyed this video. We really hope that you've learned something. And most of all, we hope to see you in the next video.
All right, so, you know, and I like that one because it just shows you, again, the potential uses for some of these. And here's just some of the things they can help do, like just on the food fraud side. All of these things theoretically can be solved using a system, but as you can imagine, it's a fairly heavy lift to get up to speed. And like the video pointed out, this is going to cost something. There's a cost to setting all this up. And, you know, in the economy that we have and we had through COVID, companies weren't really willing to do a lot of that. And, you know, one other issue with respect to VeChain is that issue about the price. Like, you know, a lot of people think crypto, oh, I want to buy low, sell high, and that's how I'm going to make my money. VeChain is kind of taking a different approach. We're like, no, we're not going to put a lot of ability for big changes in the price of VeChain because we want people to use this. And if you've looked at VeChain's price history, relatively speaking, it's a little bit more stable than others because, again, they have a different outlook of what they want to be when they grow up as a company. And you know, same with the VTHL or VTHL, right? And so, you know, I haven't done enough digging into really looking at their price history, but it's a different approach because, again, they're not trying to say, oh, buy us now, we'll go up to the moon, as they say in crypto. It's more, we want to be effectively the solution for companies, particularly B2B companies, in how they do their supply chain issues, right? Right. And so, you know, here's just an example, again, example I use in Cape Town, of how you can use this to get transparency. If you are a consumer in Cape Town and you're about to buy a chocolate bar, you can figure out exactly where it came from, right? And from the co-op to the distributor to the producer, you know, to when the retailer bought it, and all those details, they're going to be at your fingertips, right? Let me see. We have. I'm gonna skip this one because we're about to run out of time. And at this, I will end the presentation because you know, I know we had 2 hours, and I want to be respectful of people's time, and I know there's something going on afterwards. So again, you know, this last slide just kind of shows me and all the stuff I like to do, and you figured it's easier putting it on one slide than trying to explain it all. So with that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I will turn it over to WE.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Del. Thank you so much for such an informative presentation. I know I'm sitting here writing notes, even for someone who studies this as well and supports those who are interested in really leveraging the technologies. Let me see. Oh, we didn't have any other questions so far. It was very nice for you to answer them throughout the presentation in real time, but we have a lot of comments. We have a lot of congratulatory comments for the fantastic presentation. So because there are no questions, I believe Heidi will be sending out the presentation within 48 hours. And so for those who want to kind of go back and review, it will be accessible to you. And on behalf of NADAC, I'm going to say thank you so much for presenting, and we'll have a part 2, part 3, and a continuation from here on forth. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, I'm going to give back to Heidi or Karen to close it out.
Yeah, well, thank you, W. I appreciate it, and Del, thank you very much. We do greatly appreciate all the time you put into this today, and the presentation was fantastic. Obviously, with the when they get the presentation, they'll be able to see your email or your email address or your LinkedIn or your handles, to communicate any additional questions that I know we'll all be talking to as far as next topics. And certainly if any of the attendees have additional topics or topics that we covered today that you'd like to delve more into, we have had a feeling all along that the NADAC would likely be expanding this topic because we know it's been of great interest to a number of exporters. So please let us know what additional topics or existing topics you'd like us to cover in the future. And with that, we'll let it go. Thank you very much. If the panelists can stay on, please.